So welcome everyone for this afternoon's webinar. Today we are exploring the idea of practical ways to analyze where financial service providers are on their digital transformation journey. Digital transformation is something that I think many businesses, regardless of what sector you're in, and many of us are on, and the world for sure is certainly changing and has changed in the last few years. Particularly things like COVID also accelerated the need for this digital transformation journey. And so today's webinar focuses on that particular topic. We're going to be looking at, how do financial service providers navigate that journey? How do you know where you are on that journey, where maybe your gaps are, where you need to focus, and also how you can gain support perhaps from a board or your management on your digital transformation journey. And that's going to be the topic of today's webinar. I'm really glad today that I'm going to be joined by two experts in this field, Chris Statham and Konstantin Schroeter. They're from IFS Advisory, and they're going to be exploring their ideas, their experiences, their learnings with us, as well as introducing us to a tool which they've developed, which will help FSPs whilst on this digital transformation journey. Before I introduce and pass over to them, let me just remind you a little bit about our DFI webinar series. We'll be recording today's session, which we'll be sending out to you a recording link tomorrow. So if you do happen to unfortunately have to leave early, or more, which we hope more you really enjoyed this session and want to share it with a colleague, we'll be sending you the link to do that tomorrow. We're also really keen to hear from you and get your questions. So at the bottom of your screen, when you sort of move your mouse or your finger on your mobile towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see something called the Q&A function. And we'd love you to put your questions or comments or thoughts in there, and we'll get round to those once Chris and Konstantin have finished sharing their presentation and ideas and thoughts with you all. And finally, for those of you that have not met me, my name is Sarah Corley. I'm responsible for DFI with this webinar series, and I'm really pleased to have so many of you on today's call and to have Chris and Konstantin with me. So without further ado, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Great that you can be here. And yes, we're going through the presentation in about 4 minutes, and then very much welcome any questions and answers afterwards. So as Sarah mentioned, we're from LFS Advisory, which is a Berlin-based consultancy in financial services. And I'm actually personally based in Malawi, so I hope that my connection will remain good throughout. So let's get started. So, and as Sarah mentioned, I think everybody's talking about digital transformation, digitization, but really, why is this conversation happening? It's a combination of two aspects. One is the improvement or the increase in cost from that end consumer perspective. So, I think the number of people with mobile phones, whether that's a feature phone or smartphone, has gone up exponentially over the last 5 and especially 10 years. And so the expectations of the service providers. And so whilst digital transformation is very much cross-sector, I'll be focusing in on the financial sector, more specifically banks and microfinance institutions. And in regards to banks and financial institutions, I think what we can say is, they're no longer the only game in town. There's mobile operators with the mobile money. It's just been transformational in certainly in Africa and increasingly in Southeast Asia and also in Latin America. And the customer behavior is changing. There's now new inputs. I mean, or the new services also from the big techs, the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks and the like. And this is only going to increase as time moves on. And so with changing customer expectations, there needs to be that change from both the customer experience, the customer interface and the customer journey side, and then also how that is supported by the organizations in their middle and back office. And so that's really where what is happening and why it's happening. Certainly within the work that LFS does, we often come up with, when we meet clients, we say, okay, what's the difference between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation? And I'll say, the first two is really, I'll say more project based, whereas digital transformation is the umbrella And it's really, I think the biggest challenge that many organizations face is kind of how does somebody in the marketing department speak the same language as someone in the operations or the IT or the HR department? Because it's really about organizational change, and digital or technology is really to make that happen. And so you often see that organizations, they say, look, oh, what technology should we be using? And maybe that's the wrong question. It should be, what is our customer demanding? I think one of the things that we also find is that organizations very much talk about being customer centric, but when you actually do the analysis, they're not maybe as customer centric as they should be. And this is also one of the areas that we're going to be talking about today. So in terms of what is digital transformation, this being separate from specific projects or specific technologies, it's, as I said, it's much more the essence of what the organization is. Of course, there's the activities and functions and the process and models and ecosystems and assets, but it's also equally about the culture, the partnerships, and one thing which I think is often very much overlooked is the HR element, and that's something I'll also come on to later. Yes, of course, technology is going to be the enabler, and digital is obviously in the word, in the phrase digital transformation, but that's how it's done as opposed to why it's done. The why is on the customer centricity. The how is that mixture of technology on the one side and digital transformation and people on the other side. It's that internal culture. And maybe again, taking that step back is why are we trying to make those changes? At the end of the day, it's about looking at achieving customer loyalty. It's reducing churn. It's trying to get someone to be a first-time user rather than them going to your customer. And that's always going to be built up on the core elements of the financial institution. It's going to be your products and your services, your channels, the underlying technology, and increasingly importantly is going to be the customer care. And customer care is you have to obviously respect the customer, and increasingly with the customer not coming into the branches or coming into the head office, even going to agents and doing it on their phone themselves, is having those channels of customer care, of finding out information where they are, if they're short of information, and at the same time, if there's any challenges or problems to resolve, how you get over those as well. So it's looking at how to build up an agile framework to earn customer loyalty. This is the essence of what digital transformation is. And as you can see, I'm not talking about chatbots or certain technologies or certain projects. And again, I think that's it's an important aspect to really keep that differentiation between digital transformation on the one side and the projects on the other. And as I said in the second part of the webinar, really looking at how you can actually do some activities to help on this digital transformation, which is the longer aspect of it. So why are we changing? I would say, previously there was probably a greater focus on if you develop the products, then the clients will come. It's changing around to if you get the clients, then you can cross-sell the products. And that's the way of how to differentiate yourself from a strategic point of view of how to go to the market. It's how you look at building up the S of your marketing and communications, and it's really how you also interact. And it then comes from from the essence of what is of how to interact with those customers. And as I said, I think the way organizations are now working with the customers is changing just the head office and the branch. Increasingly there's either satellite branches or there's agents. Of course, if you're in a country, especially with very large mobile money agent networks, maybe they're also going through third-party agents, and then of course self-service as well. I think a lot of banks, a lot of financial institutions are doing, where they're able to do a self-registration. I always use my own personal example, not in Malawi, but when I was in Germany, of setting up a N26 bank account. I filled in the online form. I uploaded a copy of my passport, I then got a video conference call from one of their call center staff, and I sort of held up my passport next to my face for verification. I went through various other security processes, and within half an hour, my account was set up. I got an email confirmation 1 week later, maybe even less. I got an ATM card. Very seamless. Didn't need to leave the office in this case, or would have needed to leave my house. So yeah, very easy customer experience, very good customer journey, and yeah, this is increasingly where what customers are expecting. And of course, yeah, this doesn't mean that in other circumstances, or depending on the market, and of course, you know, in a group like we have today, yeah, there'll be some people in developed countries and some in developing countries. So obviously, it needs to be responsive to, you know, the background, but ultimately, it's again, it's going back to how do you get that happy customer, and this ultimately is the essence of what is digital transformation, or the aim or the objective of digital transformation. So now going on to, so that's just some of the background and the reasons why we're talking about digital transformation, and again, just to iterate the point of the difference between digital transformation as this sort of it will take time, it needs to be aligned with the business strategy, that is digital or technological projects or activities. And so one of the areas that we would suggest is to take that step back, and maybe do an inventory, or decide what is your status quo, do a gap analysis of where your organ is versus best practice in the sector. Again, looking at this is more specifically looking at the financial sector. As LFS, we developed a gap analysis tool, and maybe at this stage, our colleague Constantine to run you through a little bit about the gap analysis tool.
Yes, many thanks, Chris. So basically, as you've mentioned, we have that gap analysis tool, which has been developed for financial institutions to basically identify where they stand, where they have gaps, where they have weaknesses in this journey you've just depicted. So basically the tool itself shall help an institution identify where it stands, what actions they can take. So we think that is very important to, on one hand, understand the customers, where we want to go, but of course you always need the technology and to see where your institution really stands, what the current status is, in order to mainly identify what services are we actually ready to offer, what services are we can we offer with the technology, with the human resource and so on that we currently have. So before getting deeper into the tool, I would really want to tell you what its objectives are. And basically, it's assess where an organization is on their digital transformation journey, but at the same time establish existing implementation gaps and make recommendations for prioritization. That the latter one is maybe the most important part, because it based on that you can basically define what steps you need to do before maybe really developing or using new channels, developing new products, etc. Because these ideas are all very important on that process, but they will not help you very far if you or if your bank does not fulfill certain prerequisites. So to introduce you to our tool, which we have developed at LFS. So we basically have defined a total of 10 categories, which we see as crucial for digital transformation, and which basically include all aspects or all departments of a bank, because we think that digital transformation at the end of the day is also a process, or is a process that impacts all departments, and where all departments basically need to work hand in hand. And there's one category that is of not so important or not very much dependent on the financial institution itself, which is the digital ecosystem. But all other really focus very much on the processes, on the technology, on the human resources, and so on the current state of the financial institution. It does allow for a pretty comprehensive idea on what needs to be done and what is there and what needs to be done in the near and also in the further future. So you see these 10 categories, and in our tool we have a total of 132 questions in which we that are weighted and that belong to either of these categories. It's some categories like plans and procedures have like 4 or 5 questions. Others like technology have up to 30 questions, and they're weighted. And at the end of the day, we award a score for each of these for each category. And out of that, we also calculate an overall readiness score, which is calculated as a based on all these others, on all these particular scores. And moreover, apart from that, we also provide a narrative for each section, so that basically we have the idea that you can benefit not only from the score, but also get a decent idea and a very much tailored idea on where your institution stands. Chris, I see you stopped sharing your screen. Is that an accident or is that on purpose?
I think we lost Chris for a while from the call.
Okay, so then I'll share mine for now. I hope that will help until Chris rejoins. Is it visible? Can you quickly tell me, Sarah?
Not yet.
Okay, yes. Is it visible now?
Okay. Perfect, yes.
Okay, great, good. So as said, we have these 10 categories. Out of final score is calculated based on the score in each of these categories. And most importantly, maybe we also identify or provide a narrative and provide tailored findings and also recommendations for each of these sections. The outcome will be a report that can be shared with the board of directors, with investors, with the management, or whoever is in charge of, or for whomever it might be of interest in your organization, basically to give them a very good idea on where your institution stands, but at the same time also to provide a narrative and also an overall idea, 180-degree idea on the financial institution, which can also go far beyond any aspects that have to do with digitalization. So which might be interesting for some of you that that work for organizations that are members of larger networks, but also for others, is that we the tool does not only allow us to give an assessment of one financial institution, but further also allows us to benchmark you against other institutions. So far we have 12 respondents. So we have applied the tool with 12 financial institutions, and you can see on 3-4 continents, as you can see on the map on the right. And we can thus very well benchmark where your companies where your institutions stand against both in general against other institutions. We can also since we have applied the tool with different types of banks, including SACCOs, including investment banks, fully licensed commercial banks against microfinance institutions. We can benchmark them against each of these types of institutions, but also against of course against institutions from the country or region where you're from or where you're operating. And just one important point, and that is pretty much a table or an overview of the benchmark we've had so far. And it is visible that customer centricity, which is a point that Chris has flagged, which he raised, is often in many cases a clear weakness of many institutions. Although we often get told, no, we're really customer centric, but it is often or frequently proven that there are still gaps that are not yet closed and where much more things can be done. Just two last slides on our tool. So I said we've applied it with so far with 12 institutions. Of them, eight have filled the feedback form we've invited them to fill, and basically all of them have agreed that the recommendations identified in the report have been actively worked on, so that it was useful for them, that it has raised points that they had maybe not seen before and now identified and worked on. Yes, and another 87.5, so 7 of 8 agreed that the report was overall useful, that the assessment brought their attention to issues that they did not consider before, that the conclusions were concrete and outlined, and the main DFS relevant strengths and weaknesses of their institutions, that the recommendations were concise, took the overall status of their institution into consideration, offered them new ideas on what next steps to consider, and that the challenges were actively worked on. That is something we've in a slightly similar way also seen. And I would maybe leave out the part or other comments that were largely agreed to, but focus on some of the main findings we had and of the recommendations, and where also the FIs agreed that they identified that they would maybe need further and external support on. So, and the most mentioned part here, or the most mentioned aspect here, was the digitalization of process and procedures, so that they had identified, or that we have identified gaps that they maybe had not considered before, and now would also potentially seek support on. Then another important aspect are the IT-specific architecture roadmap and customer demand studies, and further points that have often been mentioned are the development revision of digital transformation strategies and roadmaps, visualization of BI and product services, go-to-market strategies, which are also apparently not been done by many of the companies by then. Chris, I'm happy you're back, so I would want to give over to you again.
Sure, thanks, Constantine, and sorry for the slight technical difficulty, but well, sometimes in Malawi this happens, unfortunately. As Constantine was saying, and I was saying beforehand, one of the practical steps to take on digital transformation journey is just to understand what your status quo is, and obviously that's where we as LFS thought of the developing the gap analysis tool that Constantine went through. Again, one of the things that has come across, across all markets. So we work now on this particular tool in 13 organizations over 7 countries in 3 continents. But universally, whilst all the clients said that they are customer centric, they almost, when it came to identifying where their weaknesses are, almost all of them said that their weakness is actually on the weaknesses on sorry, I'm just sharing my screen. Oh, okay, so Constantine, you keep on sharing, is actually on the customer research and mapping the customer journey. So they say everyone says that they're customer centric, but when they actually do a self-analysis, they're not actually nearly as much of that as they say they are. Constantine, can you share your screen, please?
Yes, 1 second. Mine got also lost. Give me 1 minute, 1 second. Is it there?
There we go. Yes, there we go.
Yes. Okay, great. Sorry.
Sure. so I mean, you can't be customer centric if you don't actually understand the customer, and that's really not just in terms of doing a demand side survey, but it's also looking at the customer journey, the customer experience, and this also includes when it comes to doing product or service development, involving the customer within that process of doing the human-centered design. As well as on the customer side, it's also when you're looking at your status, is to then look at also all the projects that you have as well. So to map all the projects that you have. So this was just one example from a client that we worked with, and they listed out 33 projects of that they were doing, and some of these were at a very advanced stage, and some of them were at a very early stage. Some of them were very vital because they were around regulatory compliance, and others were, should we say, nice to have. So it definitely is one of the practical steps that you should take would be to map all the projects that you have, and then to differentiate those between must-have versus aspirational. So I think there's lots of different ways how that could be split between compliance, depending on revenue, depending on resources that are available as well. I think one of the other aspects when you're looking at digital transformation from that sort of the broader view is also, if you're doing a lot of different projects, is the resource to manage that. So in this instance, although there were 33 odd projects, there was only one full-time project manager. In terms of once you actually identify, once you identify the projects that work out, it'd also be suggested to actually then map some of those the key processes, because while some will need sort of turnkey solutions, others you can find gaps which can be relatively easily or quickly or with little resource to be able to be digitized or digitalized. So this is just as an example of a loan application process, and this actually fits in nicely with a case study in a couple of slides times in terms of doing that cost benefit analysis, of seeing how kind of what is the financial impact of going through these this specific project. So as much as you should map your processes, next slide please. It would also recommend when you're looking at on the product development or service development aspect as well. So this can also help you to prioritize. So maybe you'll see that there's some projects or products or services which there's a very good market potential. So in this instance, those long-term opportunities, very attractive, very good, very large potential markets, very good at increasing customer loyalty, but also it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of resources to get them there. So what I suggest is how do you prioritize those products and services? So what are the essentials? Where are the quick wins? What are those long-term opportunities? Again, this can help you develop that sort of that implementation roadmap, understanding that we're talking of digital transformation. It's going to be several years, and even once you reach to that end, because the market has changed, because competition has changed, that it's always going to be an evolving. It's always going to be that evolving process. Next slide, please. So one of the things that as new products and new services are going to be come on board in new channels, it's also important to identify where there's going to be cannibalization, because this will then help you to move around some of your assets, whether that's your staff, where your revenue is going to be, your operational capacity. So I think a very common one, especially at the moment, is how mobile is cannibalizing branch, ATM, and POS. I think one of the key questions within the financial sector is what happens to branches? Should they be closed down, or should they stay as they are? Some other organizations are still trying to grow their branch network. So really kind of this then comes into, you have your global strategy and how you're going to reach your 3-year or your 5-year targets, but also you have your digital transformation strategy. So how do these two come together? And as and where there are, if there's going to be cannibalization, how do you move the pieces around? Next slide, please. So one of the areas that we would suggest is to do a cost benefit analysis. So on one of the earlier slides, we talked about mapping the processes. And in this case, this is for a client in Yemen. And beforehand, they had a pen and paper operation for their loan officers. And then they transferred over to a digital field app. So using tablets. And they wanted to see what was the impact of that on the one side, and then because it was part of a grant project, how some of the results could be disseminated to other MFIs in Yemen, so they can make that decision. And as we see on the findings, there are considerable savings from a time perspective from the old process to the new process, and not just in terms of how time gets translated into cost, but also how by having a more efficient process, this can also lead into new revenue because of, in this case, loan officer efficiency. And so what we can see in this particular example is through the implementation of a digital field app, and although that was an investment from a grant of $33,000, the impact was almost 100,000, and the break even was 4 months. So if you were to look at, if you were as management considering should we go down this route or not, you're doing that cost benefit analysis is very important, and also it can actually help to should we say galvanize or catalyze management or the board of directors to be able to take that decision of, yes, okay, we need to spend money, but we're going to be spending money to save money and also to make money in it. Another example is for a client I was working with in Jordan, and in which next slide, please. And in which they wanted to do an analysis of digital marketing versus traditional marketing. So in Jordan, the income per population is much higher than in some countries in Africa. But more important than that was the level of smartphone penetration, and also that is a very urban population. And they looked at what would be the costs on the one side versus the impact and return on investment of, for instance, TV, radio, leaflets, billboards, very traditional media, versus doing more sort of outbound calls through the call center, using Facebook, using social media, and then actually investing in the social media analysis platforms as well. And again, in this case in Jordan, of course, it may be different in other countries. There's a very clear differentiation between that return on investment from social media to traditional marketing platforms. So again, I think it's always important to, as one of those steps in terms of digital transformation journey, is to do that analysis, really from the financial perspective as well. And of course, cost benefit analysis should be one part of the of a comprehensive business requirements document. Again, this is something which I think I've personally seen, and LFS more generally, that when you talk about business requirements, often it's, okay, well, let's give it to the ID department, and they come up with obviously the hardware and the software needs. But a business requirements should be business led, of which you get input from the technical, the IT departments in terms of from that solution. But it should also kind of cover all the other areas as well. So it should cover, if you've done a prototype or minimum viable product, if you've been getting that feedback from the human-centered design, so you have that information of, this is how we're going to go to market, this is the value proposition, these are going to be our marketing communications, of course, which also has its budget elements as well. And so what the important part is when developing these business requirements is getting input from all stakeholders, which likely to be from all, or at least the majority of departments within the organization, to really get their input, and it'll be important really ideally for them to also be signing off on this business requirements document, so that then they have that accountability. Of course, at a later stage, you can then extract information from the BRD to put it into a vendor RFP. And as part of the business requirements, it would also be important, I think, not just to have your traditional key performance indicators, but also to have those more customer-focused key performance indicators. As we said, the essence of digital transformation is to put the customer front and center. And unless you start measuring those key performance indicators based on customer, based on their feedback, then you can't really say that you are a customer orientated organization. And this is sometimes where, should we say, the walk, the talk doesn't necessarily meet the walk. And so that's very important. Of course, at the end of the day, everything has to come down to the validation of the business case. So yes, digital transformation is part of the is the umbrella, and maybe that's going to take 5 years, maybe more. But it's always, of course, important to understand the business case. And we talked about cannibalization on one of the earlier slides, and I'm sure many of you are aware or know of the Equity Bank story in Kenya. And clearly from here we can see that whilst the number of transactions have not necessarily gone down for ATM and branch, they've not grown, but which they otherwise would have done if there wasn't internet banking and mobile banking. And it's just again, as part of that digital transformation, is always to make sure that you have that validation of the business case as well. And when we're talking about digital transformation, we obviously can't get away from the technology aspect of it as well. And this is one of the areas that came up in the feedback from our from the gap analysis report, is how do we develop that IT roadmap? So if you're thinking of a project plan, of course you'd have a project plan within digital transformation, the development of the IT roadmap, and then how, as you develop new products or new services, how the IT roadmap is aligned to that, so that it all goes together. So you have your underlying technology, maybe your integrations with switches and partners, and then of course there's the omni-channel access. So whether you're a customer and you go to an agent, you access the service through your phone or through email or a call center, or you actually go to a branch, is that consistency, and that's really where the omni-channel access comes from on the one side, and where the brand identity comes from, and comes also from that. So if I'm a customer to a bank or to an MFI or to another financial service provider, I know if I talk to them anyhow, whether it's in person or it's through digital means, then this is the service, or this is the organization that I know I'm going to be talking with, and this is what they represent. This is their brand identity. And again, probably the most important aspect of digital transformation, and one which I think really gets overlooked, is the HR element. Because clearly without people, this is it's never going to work. It's as simple as that. People are afraid of change. This is human nature. In digital transformation, maybe you're doing data entry, maybe you're an administrator or loan officer or some front office staff, and you hear people talking about digital transformation in the head office, and there's a natural worry about am I still going to have a job? Is this job still going to be viable in 1 year, 2 years time? How's my job description going to change? Is this going to affect my salary, my income? What about my personal key performance indicators or my development plan? So it's really important for digital transformation to be successful, or to make it move forward, is that internal communication, which is absolutely key. And in many chances, there's it should be seen as a positive. You know, it's how can digital transformation be beneficial to the organization on the one side, but also to the individuals on the other. You know, how will this make their job maybe easier? How can this potentially lead to increase in salary? Yeah, maybe because of job changes. How can this lead into increased personal development? So one of the areas I would suggest is not just having a project management office, but also having champions or digital transformation champions at each department. So whenever there's a steering committee or a project meeting around digital transformation, then you know who is the go-to people to go to. So in conclusion, I'll say digital transformation, it's not a silver bullet. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of challenges around it. Notably HR. At the end of the day, it's digital transformation is as much about change management as it is about the technology itself. Technology is the enabler. You know, what might work for one bank or one MFI will not be the same for another. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take time, but having a common understanding of what is digital transformation, how is it going to benefit the organization? How is it going to benefit individuals? How is it going to benefit the customer, most importantly? How do you prioritize? Where do you get started on it? You know, how do you take that status quo of this is where we are today? How do you set those new KPIs? How do you validate the business case and do those cost benefit analysis? Why is it important to do customer demand research? You know, I think these are some of the practical activities that can happen you know, either straight away or at least you should start thinking about over the next 6 to 12 months. These are the activities that we need to do to help us along that digital transformation journey, and then of which you will then have your various digitization and digitalization projects. And so with that as a sort of a conclusion, a summary, maybe back to you, Sarah, and for any questions. And sorry, one last slide, maybe these are some questions maybe you'd like to ask yourself or share with your colleagues. So again, just to try to invigorate or catalyze the conversation, you know, yeah, so within the organization that you're working with.
Great, thank you so much, Chris and Constantine. It's been, you know, really interesting to see, you know, when we think about these things, the first thing we generally think of is IT and infrastructure and, you know, like technology, but actually from the conversation that we've heard from you today, that there's many more components that we need to think about as part of this journey. And I was also pleased to see that, you know, it's almost a lifelong journey, you know, like it's not something that's not just going to happen overnight. It's going to take quite a long time and it's going to change over time, which is sort of a reflection of hearing what you're saying, so that we're in it for the long haul. It's not something that we can click our fingers and it's going to change quickly. So I guess we're sort of looking at some of the questions that have started to come in. Obviously, your tool is one option. It is a option. We had a question. You know, how do people get access to your tool? And you know, could you tell us a little bit more about sort of how you might be able to support people?
Sure. So, okay. So the first thing is after this webinar, and Sarah mentioned before, we were very happy to share this presentation, and so there's contact details at the end of the presentation. And also just a few slides about LFS more generally. And then please do contact us directly, either through the website where there's email addresses. There's also a page specifically on the gap analysis tool as well. And then obviously please email either myself and or Constantine, and we'll be very happy to set up a call. Hopefully we won't have any problems like this time. And yeah, we'll be very happy to discuss with you and see how we can move forward. And then this is both for organizations in general. So maybe you would like to have you know, an analysis or status quo where you are. But equally, if you're a consultant like us and you see within your market that you know you can see there's some opportunities, then we'll also be happy to talk to you on maybe some sort of form of a partnership or being able to share the tool as well. So we're open for both from a client side as well as sort of a partnership side as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we've got a really good question from Kombe that's come in. So his question is around the assessment. How is the assessment of risk done, especially the operational risks and the business continuity risks for regional and in-country infrastructure that's not fully matured and developed?
Okay, so I would say that's within the tool. I'll say that's almost two different parts of a question. So within the tool, and I think Constantine mentioned, there's an ecosystem. So whereas the other 9 categories are very much internal. So there's obviously the risk management internally within the bank. There's obviously then the ecosystem of, is there suitable regulation? Is there suitable policy? Are there enough other service providers? So for instance, is there a well enough developed mobile network? Are there other organizations which can maybe support? So I would say there's risks at the national level, which is obviously slightly outside of the scope of what a bank can do, because that's just part of the ecosystem. But within the tool, we recognize that there can be those challenges as well. So that's why we have that as part of the tool and something to recognize, and more especially maybe for those investors or people who aren't so aware of the day-to-day runnings of not necessarily the bank, but the country more broadly. So that, I think hopefully that side we cover the risks or the challenges at both the national level, and then the other 9 categories are very much on the internal part of it.
And we've got a question from MD Masaraf Hossein, who was asking, is cybersecurity also one of those risks that are, included within that model as well?
Yes, so of course, I think cybersecurity, data validation, data security, these are all very important risks. So there will be some questions around there. What I would say though, is the tool tries to look at the business more holistically, as opposed to just specifically on IT or on cybersecurity. So if you are looking at this tool would be going very, very deep onto the technology side. It looks at it from a best practice point of view and in some generalizations, but it maybe not go into some certain aspects. But yes, more that sort of a high level business level. But one thing that I think we're quite happy with though on this tool compared to some maybe other tools in the market is, whilst we have the questions and they have a score from 0 to 3 based on the best practice, within the design, we also have the qualitative method as well. So the scoring really helps on the benchmarking and gives a very sort of quantifiable, okay, this is where you're a 2 out of 3, for example, or a 1.5 out of 3, and it gives something very quantifiable. But it's not like a questionnaire. So if we were to do a to go through this with you, it'd be very much it's much more of a discussion, and we would be taking down notes and say, okay, well, for instance, in the issue of cybersecurity, okay, well, we know that X, Y, and Z is a problem within such and such a country, and this bank or this institution has X, Y, and Z as risk mitigation. So we put that granular detail into it, because for each question, we also have sort of the comments box as well. So it's really trying to get the best of both the quantifiable, the data, the benchmarking, as well as then on the qualitative side of it as well.
And going back to sort of that quantitative side of things, sort of one question that's come in on that from Johannes is, are the indicators weighted differently or weighted the same to calculate the overall, readiness, or do you change that from case to case?
No, so we have a weighted logarithm in the background. I think that's. And actually within the tool itself, all the questions are automatically, it's not always sort of the top answer out of the 4 is always the best one. It's randomly generated. And we have the scoring as a back-end logarithm. So that's obviously part of our IP where we think we add that extra value as well for how we did the weighting. And that's something that yeah, we were happy to share some of the questions, but not necessarily how we do the weighting, how we do the scoring itself, the calculations.
Okay.
Maybe one sentence to add on that. We have weighted, or each of the categories is, or each of the 10 categories, yes, is split into several subcategories. So we have a weighting of both the subcategories. So we also give an assessment of each of these subcategories. So for example, you can imagine that technology is assessed by a number of subcategories, the same for all other categories, of course. And each of these subcategories is weighted differently, or can be weighted differently, has a weight. And also within the subcategories, we have a set of questions. These are also weighted. So we have a kind of double weighting approach or technology.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification there on the tool. We've got some other questions, I guess, about digital transformation, and that journey in general. So Arinzi makes a point where, we know that some customers want to go digital. However, some, are struggling with that, are not ready to embark on that journey. So if we're trying to be customer centric, in the approach we're taking to transformation, how do we, I guess, deal with those customers who are perhaps not so ready yet to go on that digital transformation journey with you?
Okay, great. I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think this then, it really comes back to why are we going down digital transformation on the one side and understanding the customer on the other side. I recently just came back from Zambia, and it was looking to help a client with a rural digital strategy. And the feedback we got is, don't use Facebook and WhatsApp in the towns, but when you come out to the rural areas, radio wins. It's community radio. And it's not to say that digital is the be all and the end all. It's not the silver bullet. It's really to understand the customers. It's to know that they're not ubiquitous. It's to do that customer segmentation. And I said, and I think on the slide when we talked about understanding the customer and the customer journey is, if you do that customer demand survey, you do the segmentation, that will then also act as the foundation for your marketing communications strategy. And what you might or how you might try to attract customers in urban areas will be different from sort of the peri-urban and then separate to farmers or subsistence farmers. So it's that combination. And what you might decide is, for such and such a new product, okay, look, let's only launch this in urban areas, and we'll use Facebook and WhatsApp groups, and let's not for the time being go out to the rural areas, because it doesn't make sense. They're not ready. Let's go to those people who can adapt quickly. So let's use our marketing budget wisely, and also our operational capacity wisely as well. But a great question.
And touching on that, Chris, is this kind of capacity, because we've got another really great question that's coming, I think, from, a lot of the time we have, and our alumni in our community, as you'll know, being one of our CDFP graduates, we've all got this enthusiasm for digital finance, but sometimes we don't have enough hours or manpower and resources to actually push through all the innovative ideas that we have. So kind of what advice would you give to people on the call who work at an FSP and just feels they don't have enough resources and time to get through everything? What advice would you give to help them embark on that journey?
Sure. So I mean, I think the simple answer is prioritization. So I think again, there was the slide where one client was working on 30-something projects, and they're all most important projects, as is always the case. They're always, everything is always, we need this to be done in 1 month or 6 months or whatever the case may be, and it's sometimes it's just not possible. So how do you prioritize? It's prioritize versus what is essential. Is this essential because it's customer driven? Is it essential because it's regulatory a necessity? Is it essential because it's going to return a quick revenue for relatively little effort? Is it going to be something that's going to take 1 year? It's going to cost a lot of resources. It's something it's going to be an ongoing project. So I think between those two aspects of on that other slide, on the product development slide, for instance, is you got accessibility versus attractive. And if you look at the rationale there, that can help you to prioritize. And again, then the other level of prioritization is the must-haves versus the aspirational. And of course, not everything can be done. So where do you put, what do you put as that priority? And then at the same time I think this is where it's very important to have that, the IT roadmap. There's no point saying, let's do this thing because it's got a great market opportunity, but you don't have that foundational IT capacity to be able to implement it as well. So that's why there needs to be that digital transformation strategy and roadmap, which has an IT roadmap as part of it. And then that becomes then part of the overall global business strategy. But yeah, I think it's the tough question that almost every manager is faced with. How do you prioritize? I mean, these are just a couple of recommendations of, at least as a starting point of how to filter out what needs to be done now, what needs to be done within the next 6 months, and what can be pushed down the road a little bit for various reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think every time, all of us at one point of our life has faced that bottleneck where, the ideas and what you'd like to achieve is so much bigger than, and then, getting that through to the end is always a challenge. But I love the idea of the prioritization. And it also sort of, when you were talking, reminded me of when you were talking about the business case as well. Actually, if you can prove that something, have a very good, outlook that will show something is going to be quite profitable, then that can also help with creating the ability to go to management and ask for some of those more, the money, resources, etc., that you need to make that project happen. So it's about making sure that you do, all the steps that you talked about, or spend time in all of those steps. You can't just do, one bit, or, actually it's about the whole picture kind of coming together. And one final question, because we're almost at the end of the hour, but I just want to squeeze this one in because it's coming from two different participants. So we had both Augustin and Alfred talk about, wider like government policies and the regulatory environment. They obviously, have an influence about what FSPs can do and aspire to do. How does the tool address that, and what are some of the sort of thoughts and experiences that you have of how to deal with some of those some issues that might be hindering rather than helping with the transformation?
Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, I'll say that the tool is not there to change policy. we don't think we don't have that big a head. Absolutely not. But what we'll do is to identify and to acknowledge where maybe there are challenges or opportunities at a national level. I think what is useful, and this certainly came up, I think, with the Yemen, because we worked with 6 MFIs there, is what you'll see is that if you use this tool at a sector level or with multiple financial institutions at within the same country, you'll often find that they come up with the same challenges. So, for instance, customers. So I know, obviously, in quite a lot of African countries, there's a FinScope, but maybe in other parts of the world, there aren't any of these sort of benchmark, best practice type of areas around, say, customer demand. But what you might find is, say, for instance, if 3 or 4 banks all came together and say, look, we all recognize that we need to do this status quo, and we all see that we have this challenge, then as an association, so maybe bankers association or microfinance association, let's go together collectively to a donor, to the central bank, to the government, and say, look, as a sector, this is where we see the challenges, for instance, on customer demand. Or it could be on a specific regulatory issue, and say, look, as a sector, we've done this individually, but collectively we also see this, and we've got the benchmark data to show that we're all having the same challenge. So can we try to find a common solution which is helping everybody? So that's what I'll say. It's the tool itself is not, but certainly through the benchmark functionality, which is kind of core to the tool as well, is okay. Let's identify that we have these common opportunities or common challenges, and then work together, but with some data to go behind it as well.
Great, and it sort of reminds me of going right back at the beginning of your presentation when you talked about step 1, is knowing where you are on your journey, isn't it? And actually, if we take time to kind of take stock of where we are and know what our challenges and issues are, what our priorities are, put together, like you've said, like an IT roadmap and, you know, all of those things, suddenly, you know, things that you knew were challenges, but actually, you know, hadn't quite aware of how big a challenge it was or who else it might be affecting, you suddenly start to gain new insights and new knowledge by looking at things as you had the opportunity to reflect. And, you know, I know personally for me, you know, taking time out to reflect on, you know, whatever, you know, what your products and services is something we don't always have time to do, but actually it's really crucial to help us figure out where we are on our journey and what the next steps that we're going to take, so that we don't, using a kind of a train analogy, we don't stop at the wrong station, that we actually, you know, go in the right direction that we want to go. So I've really enjoyed listening to you both today, talking about, you know, what digital transformation is and the journey and some of the things that we need to consider. I really hope that those listening have taken lots of ideas in terms of things that they need to take in consideration on their journey. And I do hope anyone listening will also reach out to yourselves, Chris and Konstantin, to you know, who are interested further in the tool, because I know there were a few questions that we haven't. I encourage you to reach out to Chris and Konstantin, and we'll send emails and contacts, etc. Tomorrow along with the webinar recording. So thank you so much, Chris and Konstantin. I really enjoyed today's session. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all on a DFI webinar again soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.